The conversation on the left revolves almost exclusively around identity, which is, in other words, me. Narcissism is about me.
Yeah.
But you kept talking about economics. That used to be the central conversation on the left, or in America, actually.
Yeah.
Why no more?
Because the establishment has learned how to co-opt identity politics to put the brakes on economic progress and justice.
This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply.
And welcome to I Don't Speak German, episode 107. This is a prime episode, but mostly because it is a prime number. But also, normally, if you hear my name, if you hear my voice first, it's because I have a special guest who's going to come, and Jack will not be joining us. But instead, I am now going to be the host, and Jack is going to explain some internet dipshit to me. So there's a little bit of a role reversal here. I'm really looking forward to this because today we are talking about more. We're doing another episode about Jimmy Dore. And every time I try to watch or listen to this fucker, it's not that, it's not like my eyes unfocus or I can't hear or he's saying something terrible that I can't. It's just my whole brain and personality starts to unfocus. I find myself literally becoming less of a person because following this person, following Jimmy Dore, like actually trying to take him remotely seriously, even enough to prep an episode on him, is just like it's nailing jelly to a wall for me. So Jack has boldly taken on this task because he finds Jimmy Dore even more infuriating than he finds most of the other people we've covered, and so he has presumably prepped an amazing episode for us. So Jack, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks. I like that we're really mixing it up, and I often begin with like a literature joke, and you began with a maths joke. It's really characteristic. Yeah,
yeah,
very James Lindsay and some maths there.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's more math than James Lindsay has ever actually done on any of his podcasts. So
Oh, what complex papers about binomial something or other? Come on, he knows a lot about this.
I'm sure he does. It's when you put the communism and the fascism, or the fascism and the communism. That's what he knows the most.
That's right.
Yeah. If we start on James Lindsay, we will never get anywhere. So
yeah, we need to talk about a different git.
We need to talk about someone else who, we need to talk about. I'm not friend of the pod. I don't know how you want to describe him. Jack, tell me about Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore. Okay, so basically I need to begin by saying this episode is completely superfluous thanks to somebody on YouTube called Sophie from Mars, who recently did a stupendous YouTube video. It's what it gives you hope for the medium. It's one of the best things I've ever seen on YouTube about left-wing conspiracy theorists. And they cover Jimmy Dore, Caleb Maupin, George Galloway, all these fuckers, and it's a brilliant video, and actually quite a few people have done good stuff on Jimmy Dore. The Surfs have done good stuff about Jimmy Dore. Jose, and people know about this, Sean fairly recently did a excellent video about Jimmy Dore, absolutely just decimating this guy's dishonesty on his anti-vax grift. So this episode is kind of completely superfluous, but I'm going to do it anyway, just out of pure spite, because you're much more serious and conscientious than me. You feel the need to have a real good serious reason to do an episode. I just sometimes just want to kick somebody I hate, So
hey, well, that's a perfectly fine reason. And sometimes the reason we do an episode is well, we got to get 2 of these up in a month, or else, people are going to think we don't care about them anymore. So, I'm sure I've listened to the clips you have prepared for us, and oh boy, I'm sure we're going to get into some really nice topics. I would also highly recommend that Sophie from Mars video. I thought it was quite good.
It's excellent. It really is. And I've recently discovered, but I'm getting off track already, but I've recently discovered that Caleb Maupin and his hangers-on have already done, I think Caleb has already done 3 response videos and a live stream with Peter Coffin and some other dipshit.
And I think Max
watched
Blumenthal was in that one too. Yeah.
Oh, is he really? Wow.
I believe so. Yeah.
Well, I've watched some of that, and it's just as amazing as you would think it would be. But
we could do an entire Caleb Maupin episode and not touch that topic. But why would we? Anyway, let's not talk about Caleb Maupin right now. Let's talk about Jimmy Dore. So.
Yeah, there will be Caleb Maupin later on in the episode, but let's crack on with it. As I say, it's no secret that Jimmy Dore is a piece of shit. But this episode isn't really going to be like debunking him the way Sean did or Jose did. And it's not going to be anything like the kind of analysis that Sophie from Mars did. I kind of want to get at how he argues and how he operates and some of the just gaping and yet incredibly basic hypocrisies of the guy. And I'm doing this. It's kind of the Russian invasion of Ukraine particularly triggered this because this whole milieu of reactionary leftists or pseudo leftists, they really wind me up for reasons that are probably obvious to everybody. And I think it's really insidious. And I think it does tie in with our main subject because as people who actually know anything about politics know, fascism always relies upon a section of left or pseudo left useful idiots. It often has roots in a kind of breakaway section of the reactionary left. I'm not saying Jimmy Dore is a fascist or a Nazi, but I am saying that there are convergences and dangers here. But to get to the basics, Jimmy Dore, born 1965, Chicago. His father was a Chicago policeman who owned his own brickworking business on the side. He dropped out of Illinois State and then graduated from Columbia College with a degree in marketing. Took up comedy. He's had various shows and podcasts, including Citizen Jimmy on Comedy Central. Went to the Young Turks in 2009. Co-hosted a show called Aggressive Progressives. Jimmy Dore's show starts on the Young Turks, then a YouTube version starts in 2012, leaves the Young Turks in 2019. Now here we kind of have to gesture at something that's actually, it requires more than gesturing really, but it's all we're going to do. In 2021, Anna Kasparian, who's one of the co-hosts of the Young Turks, alleged repeated sexual harassment of her by Jimmy Dore. Jimmy responded, and we're going to get to how he responds to criticism, in such a way as to just basically admit it and blame her. Which
wow, I did not. This was not something I was aware of. This is no. Well, go ahead.
This is
continue. Yeah,
this is a whole thing. I'm not really going to cover this, and I feel bad about not covering it because I feel we could do an entire episode just on this.
We'll put a link in the show notes, surely. Yes,
there will be so many links in the fucking show notes to all this. Trust me. Jimmy hosts. I mean, I feel like that's it, really. We're done. it's over, but we're going to carry on anyway. Jimmy hosts the Jimmy Dore Show with Steph Zamorano, who is his co-writer and his partner, and this guy Ron Placone, who is a co-writer, and there's some other people involved. We don't really need to get into that. In 2020, Jimmy bought a very nice Hollywood mansion. It's described as a rambling 1930s Hollywood compound. Apparently, it cost him about $2 million. So he's doing okay. His current business model is doing okay for him. And because we do class politics here, let's just reiterate this. He is from a cop/petty bourgeois family. Yes. He's a college graduate who specialized in marketing communications. That is essentially advertising media, and is now a
capitalist propaganda.
Yeah, basically, and is now a millionaire Hollywood property owner who runs a flourishing private media business. I'm just saying, because one of the things about Jimmy is he kind of self-defines as one of these things that he says about himself is, I'm just a jagoff comedian. And he likes to say, I'm just a pothead. And, I'm just a comedian doing a show from my garage, stuff like this. He likes to pose as an ordinary guy, a working man. as I say, he's got a particular class position, like quite a few of the more successful YouTubers. Again, we're going to be getting onto this.
I do like to ask of these people who, look, if you come from a certain background and you actually find yourself doing like committed like to leftist activity and you make a good living at it, I'm not one to like sneeze at that necessarily. Like, yes,
No.
okay, fine. But I do like to ask the question of some of these people, have you ever actually held a job? And it doesn't sound like Jimmy Dore is a person who's ever really held a job, if you know what I mean.
I don't know. He might have done, but if he did, his job is now being a YouTube shithead, and it pays very well, clearly.
Fair. It's funny to me also, just as someone who had an interest in like stand-up comedy and used to watch a ton of Comedy Central. I never got into the Young Turks or anything like that, but Jimmy Dore has like put like no impression into my brain like as a comedian or any like until he started being like this kind of reactionary dipshit on the internet. I had had no impression of him whatsoever, except for maybe like a clip of his here and there that was being criticized by someone else. Like it was like a name I knew, but like I have no connection to him whatsoever. And I think that like that's interesting. That's interesting.
I think this is a theme that we're going to develop slightly, which is that there's a reason that this guy now does internet politics, if you want to put it that way, rather than comedy as his main career, because he's not very good at it. He's not very funny. Right. And another theme, really, I mean, we're not going to go into this in detail, but he does remind me strongly in his way of another person who was supposedly a comedian and was on the Young Turks and split away from the Young Turks and has made a career sort of being a really, really bad and stupid reactionary internet politics person.
I'm assuming you're referring to Aina Mohammed's favorite, Dave Rubin, in that case, who very recently, as in the last couple of days, showed up on Michael Shermer's podcast of all places.
Oh, great! That sounds fun.
That was one where I saw it exist and just went delete. Don't need to bother with that one. Anyway,
that'll be a nope from me, dog.
that'll be I have no reason to listen to these people at all. No. I will let others go into that good breach.
The reason that I'm on this guy, and people might remember that we kind of sort of did an episode about Jimmy Dore last year, I think it was, when he interviewed Magnus Panvidya, a Boogaloo boy. Yes. Which again is going to come back, and I'm back on it because he's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And the reason, as I kind of intimated, he's one of these people who's ostensibly on the left, but is actually reactionary, and he's drifted from a kind of left populist leftism, however you want to put it, into I think increasingly unhinged and openly reactionary and incipiently red-brown politics,
Right.
And he I think it's via the vector of conspiracy theorizing, because he's a long-term conspiracy theorist. And I would just recommend now the Rational Wiki page on Jimmy Dore is very good. There's loads of details there about the various conspiracy balls he believes, with loads of citations and receipts. Go and look at that. We're talking JFK, which, as we recently talked about with Kelly Wilde, you and I used to believe, but then we, grew up, and Building 7, and fuck knows what else. It's all there on the Rational Wiki page.
Sure. Does he do the holographic planes thing? That's really the dividing line. Moon landing. He like the moon landing didn't happen kind of guy.
He's not that far gone, but I think he's going that way.
Sure.
But he bases his shtick on, as I say, he does this kind of, I'm just a jagoff comedian doing this in my garage, and he bases it on a sort of performance of being you can't fool me, I'm too savvy, the government can't get one over on me, no flies on me sort of thing. But he also does this infuriating thing where when he fucks up, because another theme we're going to be developing in this is that he can't be wrong. Jimmy can never be wrong. Okay.
Right.
He will occasionally admit he got something wrong, but then there's always an excuse, or there's
my producer gave me that to say. That was the thing. I just say what my producer gives me.
That is classic. That is absolutely classic Jimmy Dore. I mean, hero of the working man. He just fires this producer. There's this boss that just fired. I'll blame you. You're fired. Great. Well done. That's socialism for you. But his grift is reliant upon, you can never fool him. He's always too savvy to buy what the mainstream media say or the government tell him, but at the same time, he will just make mistakes all over the place. And when he makes mistakes, he either just smears the person pointing it out, or if it comes to it, he will do this. Well, I don't know about this. I'm just a boomer. I don't know what Bugaloo boys are. I don't know about any of this. How could I know? And it's just very, very annoying. Yeah, but he's basically a kind of left-wing Fox News grandpa. But of course, like Dave Rubin, he's got the economic political behaviorism thing going on, and the audiences are pushing him towards greater and greater reactionary conspiracy theorizing, and you can see that very much with his increasing anti-vax grift, and with, as I say, it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the reaction of him, and it's emblematic of a lot of people in that sort of reactionary left sphere. Yeah, we'll be seeing various themes. He has different techniques. Like a big one is to advocate a conspiracy theory, basically sans any evidence, but using appeals to other facts that apparently make the conspiracy theory seem more credible. Like basically, these people are all still living in the war on terror era, and they can tell you anything. They can tell you that the government is doing anything they like, and then or anything the government says is a lie, and then they can justify it with reference to, Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. It's just that over and over and over again.
Well, Judith Miller, therefore, COVID denialism, basically.
Essentially, yeah, in very much the same way that Caleb Maupin proves that BreadTube is funded by the CIA. And again, we're going to get to this by telling you all about how the CIA funded Hannah Arendt and people like that in the 50s and 60s. Like, well, okay, maybe some of that's true. Maybe COINTELPRO existed, etc. That doesn't prove anything about what you're saying now. It doesn't prove ContraPoints is being paid by the NSA. Come on. But this is the technique that's used. And another thing Jimmy does is any claim you don't like, you just discount by pointing out that the person making it or the organization that it's coming from has some form of connection with somebody else that you don't like or that you can insinuate is untrustworthy. Again, Grey Zone does this all the time. We're going to be getting into this. And of course, you just ignore any such affiliations with regards to your own sources. Complete hypocrisy. One thing I do want to mention, we already mentioned his Anna Kasparian allegations, is that this guy gives off misogynist in fucking waves. It's very Stefan Molyneux for me. He's got a serious hate boner for Hillary Clinton. He's repeatedly peddled she's got Parkinson's disease. He said that she tried to kill Julian Assange with a drone. He's kind of sort of peddled the Seth Rich conspiracy theory. Rachel Maddow is kind of his personal Satan. He hates Rachel Maddow.
Not that these are not fairly good targets. So leftist,
these are awful people.
How do you like go after Hillary Clinton and never hit anything real? There's so many things to criticize and to be she's got Parkinson's. It's just the dumbest shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's in service of what is essentially a reactionary agenda. It's not really it seems like criticizing from the left, but it's not, because the ultimate agenda of these people is not left wing. It's pseudo progressive. It's pseudo left wing. I first became very aware of Jimmy Dore because his channel's like a clearinghouse for all the opinions of the people during Russiagate who were, self-proclaimed Russiagate skeptics, and you got Greenwald, Aaron Mate, Michael Tracy, Matt Taibbi, that entire sort of coterie of people. And as far as they're concerned now, it's just a fact now that Russiagate was just a hoax, Mueller report is a damp squib, all this, despite the fact that there is acres of evidence, including in the Mueller report, of extensive relationships between the Trump organization and Russian government and Putin and all this stuff. There's loads of it. Paul Manafort in Ukraine is an entire series of podcasts by itself, for God's sake.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But Jimmy, despite ostensibly being, this is emblematic. Jimmy, despite ostensibly being on the left, he's much more likely to talk to you about Hunter Biden's laptop. Now Hunter Biden, Burisma, these aren't people we like, but you know what I'm saying.
I mean, if the choice was Jimmy Dore or someone who's doing cocaine off of a stripper's ass in Ukraine, I mean, I know who I'd rather hang out with, but
Sure. But it all comes from latent and often not so latent sympathy with Trumpism. That's what this is. I mean, Jimmy said in the run up to 2016 that a Trump presidency would be better for progressives than a Clinton one, which there you go.
Which, it's just the most brain dead takes. I mean, was he also one of those Bernie and Trump are both kind of standing on the same anti-establishment wing against Hillary Clinton? Was he one of those guys?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
he also fell big time for Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, yeah, of course, all these fucking, she says one word, maybe we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, and then suddenly it's coconut mommy, I love you. That's the name the Nazis gave her. Just to be clear, that's not I'm not trying to be racist.
That's not your special
that's
name.
That's not my special name for her. No, but yeah, no, that stuff is always she's just principled. No, she doesn't want to invade these countries because of the risk to American service members. Which, not that I want American service members to die, of course, but that's not really the nub of the argument here. That's not really what I call an anti-war, anti-imperialist stance. Is we really need to protect the hairs on the heads of American service members. Maybe the people of Afghanistan have a larger moral frame here, and it's never framed that way with these guys. Or at least Tulsi never framed it that way. It was always American interests need to be protected, but we don't need to go to war because et cetera, et cetera. It's never the actual the real issues at the heart of this, and I could go on about this for hours. We're circling so many things that we could just spew on about forever.
Well, this is the thing. This podcast is already going to be too long, and we're going to fly past so many things that we could do entire shows about. Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, of course, she doesn't oppose American involvement in Afghanistan on the grounds of caring about the Afghan people, because a lot of them are Muslims and Arabs, not all of them, but a lot of them. And she's a
Hindu nationalist.
Hindu supremacist. Yeah. She's a Hindu nationalist. She's in bed with Modi and the fascist government of India, which is completely secondary from this campist, supposedly anti-imperialist, reactionary left point of view. It's completely secondary to the fact that she criticizes the American government for regime change wars. That's all they care about.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, let's be clear. Russiagate there was a lot of, liberal cope and hype and nonsense spoken about it, but criticizing the liberal establishment, the Democratic Party, Stephen Colbert, MSNBC, etc., that's no reason to effectively whitewash the Trump organization and its very, very dodgy ties to the right-wing authoritarian regime in Moscow. But that's what this amounts to.
Exactly.
But of course, as far as these people are concerned, Russiagate is a hoax. Like Jimmy Dore just says Russiagate hoax, and he will adduce that as evidence of his superior trustworthiness. He will talk endlessly about how he is smeared and silenced and attacked, and he will say, yes, but I was right about this, that, and the other. And the things that he's proving himself right about are, Russiagate was a hoax. Assad didn't gas his own people. The Duma gas attack wasn't Assad, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is pretty insidious stuff. This, from my point of view, this is very insidious stuff. The pro-Assad Syria denialism is, there's orgy of that stuff in this coterie. It's all conspiracy theorizing, false flag theories, conspiracy theories about the white helmets, the Duma attacks, as I say, recited from RT, Russian propaganda.
Yep.
Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, and Norton Grey Zone contingent, Eva Bartlett, discredited RT stooge conspiracy theorist. Dore was using EcoWatch as a source before they cleaned their act up. He said Assad gassed his own people as a conspiracy theory, etc., etc., etc. And again, we don't say that we approve of American imperial attacks upon Syria. That's not the same as whitewashing Assad. This is child stuff. But it's not obvious to a lot of people. I want to give a kind of brief capsule description of the channel by just reading some episode titles, and I think our audience will probably be able to pass some of this. Like one of the most recent ones I've seen is obese an identity? Rogan and Marr get blowback for talking about obesity. You can just guess how great that is.
I know. I have listened to that podcast.
You have?
I haven't listened to it. No. I know. Like I could probably recite it to you verbatim.
Yeah, without having
listened to it. Right? Yeah. No.
Absolutely. Where's the racism? Triple question mark. Rogan and Marr mock quote unquote racism of lab leak theory. Medical ethics professor fired over vaccine, now vindicated. Scandal, ivermectin versus ivermectin. Which study is right? Triple question. That presumably is his response to the recent study that basically just completely demolished the idea that ivermectin can be used as a COVID treatment.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a criticism of the Together study, which is, just like, the gold standard of evidence. Ivermectin does nothing for COVID. It's fine.
Yeah. How the left lost its mind over COVID and became authoritarians. That's with Christian Parenti from Grey Zone. He went into overdrive about the Will Smith slapping of Chris Rock thing. Will Smith mocked alopecia victim on television. I think it's kind of worth taking a little side trip on this, because this is another part of Jimmy Dore's thing. His identity is that he has this very sort of strong comedian identity. He's not actually very good at being a comedian, but being a comedian is very much part of his identity. And it comes very much from that kind of boring, outdated idea, beloved of people that never got past being a student and listening to George Carlin and Bill Hicks records, of the comedian as kind of an outrageous truth teller, So he's big supporting Chris Rock. He went big into supporting Dave Chappelle after he was criticized for disgusting transphobic jokes and opposing cheap housing developments. And he went big time into supporting Joe Rogan during the whole Spotify thing. He's a big fan of Joe Rogan. He says he's a lefty. Again, I think it's pretty well established now that Rogan is albeit a flailing one, a reactionary. But this is a big thing with him. The Squad pushes war and imperialism in Ukraine. He hates AOC. Media whitewashes Ukraine Nazis. Gas sales, the real reason for the Ukraine war. So it wasn't Putin imperialism, Hunter Biden laptop confirmed real by New York Times. US NATO preparing false flag chemical attack in Ukraine. That was from March the 5th. The Grey Zone, Blumenthal, etc., they've been going hell to leather on pushing false flag conspiracy theories about the various horrific Russian atrocities in Ukraine. Every time they get debunked, they just move the goalposts. I'll link actually to a couple of quite good Twitter threads from this guy, Neil Abrams, who goes through two of these examples of the Grey Zone attempting to use conspiracy theorizing to whitewash these atrocities. COVID tests secretly used to sequence your genes.
That's a rare one. You don't hear that one.
Full-blown dictator. Trudeau freezes protesters' bank accounts in authoritarian crackdown on the truckers. Again, little stop off here. Big support for the trucker convoy. Yeah. And of course, we quite recently did an episode on Lauren Southern, who referred to Trudeau as a dictator. I think it's very interesting, that synergy, and I also think it's interesting what you mentioned. You noticed the title about Ukraine Nazis. He's been going big on that one, like Ukraine is just a Nazi country if you believe Jimmy Dore, because of the Azov battalion.
They use the existence of the Azov battalion to and some of the horrifying propaganda that they produce. Like, we're no great fans of the Azov battalion, but that was like the immediate thing is like, oh, and now all you supposed anti-fascist leftists are totally in support of the Nazis in Ukraine because you're just obeying your NATO masters or your CIA masters or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, can we just not have like the most childish argument in history about this?
Yeah.
Like, and this is the thing when I say, like, I just feel my personality like running out of my ears when I like try to follow this, is that there's just no there here. I mean, I'm looking forward to like getting into the clips and like going through all this stuff and kind of having a laugh at this guy. But like, it is just like there's nothing to push against. It's just this reactionary pseudo populist, garbage. I mean, it's just, it doesn't hold up to the slightest bit of scrutiny. I mean, Caleb Maupin at least has an ideology, like there's something there. He's got like a fully worked out, completely batshit history of like leftism, and he has like an ideology that you can at least respond to. Jimmy Dore, from everything that I've seen, is just like he's like Tim Pool without the charisma. And do you know how bad you have to be Tim Pool without the charisma? Even reading those like headlines, it's like any one of those could be a Tim Pool headline. We could do a little a game of, guess who wrote this, guess the thumbnail based on reading it. Is it Tim Pool or Jimmy Dore? I mean, they're producing effectively equivalent content in terms of at least the ideological component at this point.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're very similar in many respects. But I think I mean, maybe just it isn't pure spite, but I think it is worth going into this a little bit, because I do find I find the fact that this guy has quite a large audience and quite a lot of I mean, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about him having Caleb Maupin on for his absolutely ludicrous BreadTube is CIA video that he did recently. That's, he's got a significantly bigger audience than Caleb Maupin. He's probably boosted Caleb Maupin's profile by doing that.
No, so yeah, for sure.
This is dangerous, So why is it that the guy who isn't funny, who doesn't know anything about politics, who has no particular charisma or personality, no real knowledge, no expertise, who blatantly just switches back and forth between, I know all, you can't fool me, I'm too savvy, and on the other hand, well, I don't know anything. Don't blame me. I don't know. It's so transparent, and yet he's managed to carve out a profile and a niche and an audience. And despite the blatant hypocrisy, like, as I say, with the Ukraine thing, they go on, and there's a problem in Ukraine with the far right. Ukraine has a very complex and long history, which informs its current predicament with the far right. We're going to be talking about this a little bit. The Azov battalion is a real thing, etc. If you believe Jimmy Dore, and several other of these people, Ukraine is basically a fascist country. Like, the police is run by the Nazis, and there's Nazis in the government, etc. And basic facts about who the minister of this and who the undersecretary of that is in the Ukraine government, just wrong all over the place. And yet it keeps on coming, acres and acres of this stuff, and the incredible hypocrisy as well. Look at CNN, look at MSNBC. They're repeating Nazi propaganda. They showed the Azov battalion. There's a Nazi symbol on this guy. He's hell for leather supporting the trucker convoy. The trucker convoy, organized by, supported by, affiliated with far right fascists all over the place in Canada. You look at their rallies; they're holding far right banners and wearing far right symbols. Apparently, that basic hypocrisy doesn't affect Jimmy Dore's ability to tell you what you should think about Ukraine, to imply that the Russian invasion, not quite say, but imply that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is justified because there's Nazis in Ukraine. And it's just it's infuriating. It really is.
And he doesn't even have the rhetoric about like the brave Red Army that crushed fascism in the 40s that Caleb Maupin has, right? Like, that's one of Caleb Maupin's things that he'll bring back over and over again. It's like the glorious and wonderful Red Army and how they were the true heroes of World War II, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, looking back at them as like the true anti-fascists who were anti-imperialist. And Dore doesn't even seem to have that. It's just this like a pose. It's just this like aesthetic choice almost.
Yeah. Well, one of the funny things about the videos with Caleb and Jimmy is, like, Caleb will go off on these rants about, the science of dialectical materialism and providing a scientific understanding of what fascism is, and about how Marxism actually says this, that, and the other, and Jimmy's eyes sort of glaze over, and he's sort of standing there going, when is this going to be over? It's
this
hilarious.
This is the most I've ever identified with Jimmy Dore, by the way.
Yeah. Stalinist is too much praise for Caleb Maupin. But anyway, let's a few more of these episode titles, because I think they give you a very good pocket picture. Pfizer releases long list of over 1,000 vax adverse events. Warning against boosters. Frequent boosters threaten immune system. Doctors pressured to lie about Omicron. Hillary caught spying. Hillary spied on Trump, says Biden's Justice Department. Natural immunity vindicate. Jimmy and Max Blumenthal have both been on this natural immunity kick. On and on and on this shit goes.
Yeah.
On and on and on. Why not us? Masks off at UK airports, but not at you. Jimmy, since we in this country very ill-advisedly got rid of all our COVID restrictions, our cases are through the roof, and airports and airplane companies are cancelling flights because all their staff are down with COVID. Maybe that's why. Who knows? Moving on a bit. We referred to the Sean video, which very effectively deals a blow to Jimmy's basic standards of accuracy and honesty when it comes to this the anti-vax grift that he's been on. Not quite anti-vax because he doesn't want to get thrown off YouTube or anything like that, but he wants to pander to that audience. Jimmy Dore's response to Sean is something we're going to track a little bit. But this is giving you a picture. There's just so much of this stuff. I've been left behind by it as I've been researching it. Okay, so let's get to the first clip. And the first clip is about the Ukrainian Biolabs nonsense. So we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, obviously, and this entire tendency, this reactionary left pseudo anti-imperialist tendency, they've gone into overdrive, trying to maybe not quite say this, but heavily imply with everything that they say and do that Putin's done nothing wrong. So a big thing in that has been the explosion of this conspiracy theory about the biolabs in Ukraine. Again, it's not the main topic of the episode, but just a little bit of background. It started basically on Twitter as a conspiracy theory touted by a QAnon influencer. And from there it spread. I mean, QAnon just went nuts for this. Listen to the QAnon Anonymous podcast episode they did about this. They think the Russian troops are rescuing like slave children from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom from Ukrainian dungeons. But it got picked up by Tucker. Tucker ran with it. He's done loads of segments about this to the point where apparently the Kremlin said to Russian TV channels, just show clips from Tucker on television all the time. And Glenn Greenwald has gone with this as well. And part of this is Glenn's war on fact checkers. And this is something that Jimmy has jumped on very readily because Jimmy loves, because he gets fact checked and debunked so much, he loves to talk about how fact checks can't be trusted. So we're going to start with a little bit from a clip from a video that was on, it's called Yes, Ukraine Does Have Biolabs, Admits US Government. This was from March the 12th.
Unproven claims of U.S.-funded Ukraine bioweapons labs spread online. So this is a fact check. So we've showed you how the fact checkers are almost always wrong because they're funded by people who want you to think they're fact checking, but they also have a bias, and it's usually corporate. So here's another fact check, factcheck.org. We've shown you where they get their money. Social media posts misrepresent U.S. Ukraine threat reduction program. Okay. Russia is targeting U.S. biological weapon labs in Ukraine invasion. That's from PolitiFact. And that's from the guy who did a bogus fact check on our show about coronavirus. That's that incel guy I showed you before. I'm not going to mention his name, but it's the same guy, and he's getting this wrong too.
Okay. So I started this video, and I got that literally that far in, and I'm like, wait, what? So what the fuck is he talking about? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go back to a previous video called Another Bogus Fact Check of Jimmy Dore Debunked.
Okay.
From January the 29th. And I've edited this clip down a bit to get some of the best bits together.
Because that's what these guys do, right? Is they're just kind of constantly responding to like previous fact checks or whatever, and just spewing out like nonsense about, well, and this person was wrong earlier about this thing. Well, but there's never like a laid out, like organized, this is actually what's going on here type, conversation about this. It's always just like, inclinations and vague insinuations as opposed to anything concrete.
Absolutely. The clip you just heard is from a video, which is a clip of an interview between Jimmy and Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is on there to talk to Jimmy about these supposed bioweapons development facilities that are all over Ukraine, which they don't quite say this, but they heavily imply that it, justifies Putin's invasion or is one of at the very least, It's one of the things that makes Putin's invasion, you shouldn't condemn it. Certainly not because the US government condemns it and the liberal media condemns it. So obviously you shouldn't believe them. You shouldn't share the same. You should never agree with them morally or politically about anything. So one of the ways in which you justify that is you find ways to create fake nuance and fake complexity. So you come up with the whole sort of, Putin is responding to NATO expansionism, which is bollocks. Putin is responding to, this America's trying to block a pipeline or something. It's always a fucking pipeline with these people. And one of them, the one that's had big success on the right and with these people, so still on the right, is this thing about there being bioweapons facilities all over Ukraine. Now, as we're going to say, complete crap, but they love it. But it's very important that the fact that it's repeatedly fact-checked by PolitiFact and loads of other people that Snopes, all these things, shown to be crap. It's very important that not be allowed to slow down the narrative. So what they have to do is they have to go into overdrive smearing the fact checkers. And Glenn has this entire Substack article, which is about, there's people who declare themselves fact checkers all over the media saying that this isn't true. Well, you can't trust them because, and then you get into acres and acres of Greenwaldian bafflegab and filibustering and et cetera, et cetera. And this is basically what Glenn is doing on Jimmy's show. But you see, in that clip we just heard, Jimmy refers to a fact check of a previous thing that he did, and he writes it off with, well, we showed you where they get their money. Now this is a thing.
Right.
If you can show that somebody who said something you don't like got some money, or even just has some sort of association with somebody else that you don't like or is suspicious, particularly, looks bad from a left perspective, you can just say, well, that's it. You don't need to pay any attention to anything they say. So I'm not wrong after all, despite the fact check. And so that's why we're going back to this previous video from January the 29th, another bogus fact check of Jimmy Dore, which is about a PolitiFact fact check of a video that Jimmy did, recycling the claims of this guy on YouTube who sort of persistently does videos casting doubt on the narrative about vaccines and COVID, et cetera, John Campbell. And this video is about his claim that Office of National Statistics data from the British government shows that the COVID death rate is much lower than reported. PolitiFact fact-checked this, debunked it. Jimmy then responded with a debunk of the debunk. That's what we're going to listen to now.
So guess what happened again? This is great. We got another fake fact check, this time from PolitiFact. So we get these fake fact checks, and they're not fact checks at all. And this one isn't either. And so we get to show you. So here it is, PolitiFact. And they're funded by the Poynter Institute. Total deaths from COVID much lower than reported. That's in quotes because that's the headline in my video.
You can tell it's wrong because he read it in a silly voice. That's not
right.
only great comedy, but it's very analytical.
No death totals from COVID-19 in England have not been overstated. That's what PolitiFact says. That's counterfactual. They have been, and the PolitiFact is full of shit, and I'm going to prove it to you. By the way, here's the guy who did the fact check. That's the guy. I'm not going to show you his name because he doesn't deserve to be propped up on a bigger platform than he deserves, so I'm not going to mention his name. But I wanted to show you the picture they have for him up at PolitiFact. They want to let you know, yes, we hire incels directly from their mother's basements. And you want to know what his qualifications are? This guy has less qualifications than me. Ready? Here's his qualifications. He's a contributing writer to PolitiFact, and he has previously done that same thing at. He's been a content editor at Chicago Tribune and South Florida Sun Herald. Don't you know what Sentinel? And do you know what the qualifications are to get a job working at the Tribune? Nothing.
Firstly, I mean, you can tell again why this guy does this for a living now instead of comedy, because that's his comedy there. The guy
right.
he's an incel and he lives in his mother's basement. That's
and this like just sort of poking fun at people's appearance as a way of like discrediting them. Totally not a Nazi thing, by the way. Like it's kind of a perpetually online thing. I mean, we've done the Baldy McDickface thing. We've, look, you deal with these people, you kind of make fun of it, but at least, but that's just a joke as a way of getting to further analysis. This is like, well, this guy just looks like an incel. He's just a loser. And you shouldn't listen to him because yada, yada. Well, Jimmy Dore, not exactly a spring chicken either.
And then you get to, he basically starts just writing fanfic about how you don't need any qualifications to work for PolitiFact. And while in the same breath telling you essentially that this guy has had quite a long professional career as a journalist working for 2 reputable news outlets. I've looked at this guy's LinkedIn. I'm not going to name him either because there's no reason why this poor fucker needs to be dragged into this or any more than he already has. But I've looked into this guy's LinkedIn. He has an extensive career. As a journalist of good reputation. There's loads of testimonials on there from people who've worked with him saying he's a great fact checker. Jimmy makes a virtue of just by his claims, just being a jagoff comedian and a pothead working out of his garage with no qualifications. Well, make your mind up, Jimmy. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, but this is the thing that I was kind of talking about a little bit in the Kelly Weil interview is, the fact that Jimmy Dore is not within the establishment gives him a higher level of credibility. You see, because he's not being fed the talking points by the machine, you see. And on certain issues, I think look, we understand the systemic issues that come along with, having working within the liberal media or working within, getting money from the State Department, even in some rarefied way. I mean, this is a constant source of criticism from the left of legacy media. Obviously, Jimmy Dore isn't doing that. He's just spewing nonsense. There's no argumentation here. There's no connection. It's just, a smear. It's just a smear. There's nothing else here.
Well, like a lot of stuff that he says, and again, this is partly why he and people like him are insidious, is that a lot of it on the surface it sounds reasonable enough from a left perspective. Like a lot of things, he will talk about the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party. He will talk about the hypocrisy of the liberal media and stuff like. He will talk about genuine problems, genuine crimes of US imperialism, etc. He will talk about genuine problems with labor relations and bad things done by this company. So, they will talk about stuff that's reasonable on the surface. And then when you get underneath it, you get to, an actual content that is at best contentless and at worst actively reactionary. But the thing I really just wanted to point out that it's just internally contradictory because he doesn't give a shit about whether it makes sense or not.
Right.
You can't trust this guy because he has no qualifications. You can trust me because I have no qualifications. That's what he's saying.
Yeah. No.
Whereas in fact, this guy does have qualifications as a fact checker, and it's actually a very good article that does in fact debunk Jimmy's recycling of this guy John Campbell's very bad YouTube video that distorts the reality about COVID cases in Britain and in a very misleading and a very dangerous way.
It will not shock you that John Campbell has come up in my research previously.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking a little bit more about him as we go on. So let's carry on with the clip.
Dore shares his interpretation of another YouTube video from a Briton named John Campbell. How about Dr. John Campbell? He's a PhD. So now right away this is a political article because they're leaving out facts so they can skew your perception of Dr. John Campbell, and they're not calling him Dr. John Campbell. I don't even know if here. Dr. John Campbell, whose bio describes him as a retired nurse teacher and emergency nurse with a PhD focus on nurse education.
So you see what's happened here. Jimmy is reading this for the first time as he's reading it to us. Again, this is a theme that's going to be going on, on and on and on.
Also very Tim Pool, right?
Very Tim Pool,
Sargon of Akkad level.
You literally took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. He says, they're distorting facts by not telling you that John Campbell is Dr. John Campbell. And then as he reads on, he discovers that they do, in fact, tell you that John Campbell is a PhD. John Campbell is a PhD and a nursing trainer. He is technically entitled to call himself Dr. John Campbell. He has a PhD. The fact is, if you're recycling his COVID misinformation and you are without context, even if it's just in the title of the video, calling him Dr. John Campbell this and Dr. John Campbell that, you are giving a misleading impression, which is what the PolitiFact article is clearly trying to address. Anyway, let's carry on and finish this up.
Do you see what they're doing? I didn't get a fact wrong at all. Facts 100% correct. They didn't like the interpretation. They wanted me to say something else around that fact.
That is literally what you've just criticized them for, Jimmy. They didn't get the facts wrong about John Campbell's qualifications. You just criticized them for having an interpretation of those qualifications that you don't like. You literally just...
Right.
Now,
of course. I mean, and it's such like what all of these like reactionary dickbags do when it's like, well, did I get a fact wrong? You know, did I make a statement which is factually incorrect? You know, Brett and Heather, Jesse Singal, I mean, all the fucking Nazis. It's always like, well, didn't I say the accurate thing? Didn't I caveat properly? Did I make a technical error? And it's like, even if that were true, which in many cases it is not when it comes to these guys, you are leaving a clear implication that is factually incorrect. You know, you are leading your audience down a path to incorrectness by using implication and by using skewed context. Yes, and that is, but anyone, you know, Jimmy Dore has made his living with the English language for like his entire life, right? You know, he literally has a degree in marketing.
Got a degree in marketing.
You know, like you understand, like this, you can't be this dumb. This has to be intentional. But I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Like, yeah.
Well, it's
infuriating. It's just infuriating. Yeah,
it's both at once. You know, it's intentional and it's also dumb. But you know, what you just described is exactly what Jimmy is doing in the original video. That PolitiFact fact check is fact checking. That's what they're criticizing for. You know, it's not a question of him getting facts wrong. It's a question of him giving a misleading impression through, you know, aesthetics and context and all this stuff. That's what they're criticizing. That's what they're correcting. But of course, he can't be wrong because his grift depends upon this. You can't fool me. I'm Jimmy Dore thing. So it has to be addressed. So what you do is you smear. And one of the, you know, we've seen, you know, incel guy, mother's basement, etc. Another thing you do, you see at the start of the clip, he says, oh, they get their money from the Pointer Institute. He mispronounces it. He says Pointner Institute because again, he's reading it for the first time as we're watching. The fact that PolitiFact gets money from the Pointer Institute supposedly just immediately makes anything they say suspect. Okay, facts are apparently just contingent upon the moral status of the or even just the friends of the person relaying them, right? So that the Pointer Institute is untrustworthy because they get some money from the Koch Foundation and they get some money from the Washington Post, right? This is what he says in his video. Later in the same video, he quotes from an article called How Fact Checkers Mishandled the COVID-19 Origins Debate, which presumably to carry on just casting doubt on fact checkers in general, in the abstract, and also to keep kind of pushing the lab leak theory to his audience.
This is a pro lab leak video, I'm sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And he's reading this article from something called realclearpolitics.com. Oh, this is another thing. He says, he makes a joke, again, brilliant comedy, about how you can tell PolitiFact is being political because they've got politi in the name, right? Later on, he's quoting from an article from an organization called Real Clear Politics. It's got politi in the name by his own standards. It's untrustworthy. You look up Real Clear Politics, it's owned by Real Clear Investors and Crest Media. The same people publish Conservative Country, a far-right website. It publishes pro-Trump. A Facebook page publishes pro-Trump, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, far-right memes, etc. And it relies upon Real Clear Politics is aggregated from other sources such as the Washington Post, the New York Post, Salon, Fox News, The Federalist, and National Review. Literally, in one video, is telling you cannot trust this fact check because it gets money, because PolitiFact get money from the Pointer Institute, who get money from the Washington Post. Later on in the same video, he's reading from an article from a website that gets stories from the Washington Post. So this is not me saying this. I'm not saying you can't trust that article because the same website gets stories from the Washington Post. This is him saying this.
I mean, it's within 30 seconds. He's just, he's flip-flopping all over the place, just depending on, I mean, this is like sub James Lindsay level
Much
sliminess,
sub. James Lindsay is a
much-
model of subtlety compared to this fucker.
Right. Yeah, I am familiar with Real Clear Politics, although maybe like kind of back in the day. But I always got the sense of them as just kind of an aggregator site, just putting ads on other people's blurbs and shit. So certainly not what I would consider a, reputable, at least go and click through to the original article if you're going to quote from Real Clear Politics, right? Go quote from the Washington Post or the New York Post or whatever. It's just the sort like the slimiest, like low effort bullshit that just makes Jimmy Dore so infuriating and just so like difficult, right? Because it's just surface level. I mean, I know you put hours and hours of work into this, but you didn't have to. It's all right there. He'll tell you himself.
Well, it's surface level because this is always the same with these guys. They think their audience are idiots. They have contempt for their audience. They don't expect anybody watching to pay enough attention to go into this much detail. They don't think anybody's going to do this. They don't think any of the people that they're selling this stuff to is ever going to bother to think about it. The fact that he openly contradicts himself in the same video, they think their audience, and a hell of a lot of their audience clearly do this, are just going to go, yeah, okay, whatever, which is great for particularly with these people that market themselves as kind of, get the real truth here. They're all lying to you. Don't be fooled. Come to me for the truth. And on that subject, if we go back to the original video that we started with, the thing about the Ukrainian Biolabs, the one with Glenn Greenwald, this is basically in response to the Senate testimony of Victoria Nuland. This caused the bioweapons labs in Ukraine thing to go insane across all these people. She was testifying to the Senate, and Marco Rubio asked her, does Ukraine actually have biological weapons? And she responded, Ukraine, I'm not quoting, but it's something that you can go and look at it on YouTube. It's there. It's not a secret. Go and look at it. She responded, Ukraine has biological research facilities, yes. And all these people just instantly took this as confirmation somehow of US-funded, secret, nefarious biological weapons programs bases all over Ukraine. And thus, maybe not quite saying this, but hint, hint, Putin was right to invade, or it's understandable that Putin is invading, or, don't support the condemnation of Putin, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't mean anything like that, obviously. Go and watch the clip. It's a routine question about something that is public knowledge and has been public knowledge for a very long time. The Russian propaganda about Ukrainian biological weapons labs is all based on public record information about the fact that there are biological research facilities in Ukraine. There's these places all over the former Soviet Union. There used to be Soviet research facilities. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, in line with international treaties, publicly, it's not a secret. The United States has been partly funding these labs to, there's no question about the fact that this is partly US soft power, that it's a form of neo-imperialism. If you have an actual structural analysis, you can accommodate that while also saying, it's not a nefarious plot to build, secret toxins that will be carried by birds into Russia and attack only people of Russian blood,
Right. Well, and these are like biological research. Like I've worked in a biological research lab.
Yes.
I mean, like millions of literally millions of people have worked in one of these. Every industrialized country on the planet and many not industrialized countries have biological research facilities. Do you know why? Because they're doing research for medical reasons.
Yes.
Yes. You can't jump from that and jump from like US funding. Like also the NIH and other, three-letter agencies in the US fund a lot of grants around the world for research, and yes, it's a part of US soft power. Absolutely. If that's the argument that Jimmy Dore is making, if that's the argument here, I'm happy to have that conversation. They're literally just confusing biological research facilities with biological weapons facilities. Like that's all this is. That's all it is.
It's as I say, it started with a QAnon conspiracy theory, and these people have just from Tim Pool and Russell Brand and Tucker right the way across to Glenn Greenwald. They've run with this. They've quietened up a bit about it now, but at the time they just went knucking futs with this. And the thing that really catalyzed it was this Senate testimony from Victoria Nuland, who is the What is she? Hang on a second. I've got it written down, the proper title. Sorry, hang on a second. Let me get this right. Who is the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, right? And she's doing this Senate testimony where she's talking to Marco Rubio, and it's a routine exchange about public record stuff. Yes, there's biological research facilities in Ukraine. And they basically, Jimmy and Glenn bake this like a fucking Q drop. They really do. They watch this and they hallucinate onto it. They project onto it this whole psychodrama where Marco Rubio is handing her this question where she's supposed to say, no, there's no biological research facilities in Ukraine. And for some reason, I mean, it's a pretty shit conspiracy if she just blurts it out. For some reason, she just blurts out, yes, actually, there are. And they project onto Rubio this like stunned disbelief. He's like, what the fuck? Why did she say that? And it's like they hallucinate, people in the background suddenly doing like this with papers. What's going on? Why is she saying that? You know, and Rubio has to immediately try to get her to backtrack, and she starts to backtrack. You know, and go and watch the video. None of that happens. None of that happens. It's a root. I grieve for the soul of Richard Pryor, right? Because these people never tire of saying to each other, who are you going to believe, the government or your lying eyes? Who are you going to believe, CNN or your lying eyes? Russell Brand says it all the time. Jimmy Dore, all these people, they say it all the time. I'm asking you, I'm begging you, go and watch this exchange between Marco Rubio and Victoria Nuland. You know, believe your eyes. This is nothing. This is nothing. But these people they've managed to convince themselves that what they're seeing is scandalous confirmation of, you know, like a conspiracy being blown out in the open. And it's just fucking crazy. It really is. And this is basically what's happening in this. And Glenn Greenwald wrote this entire Substack about it, where he's also having a go at fact checkers that dare to say this isn't real. And, you know, in line with his usual method, he just, as I say, gish gallops and baffle gabs and filibusters. And that's basically what he's doing on this Jimmy Dore video as well. Yeah, I think we can listen to the clip now.
So, Glenn, why would you repeat Russian propaganda from Russia just because Victoria Nuland admitted it was real?
It's like we're at that point pretty much. Like, if the Russian government says anything, like, for example, there's some pretty substantial and dangerous neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine. Something that the Western press has been talking about for at least a decade, like concerned about, warning about. But if you say that now, you'll immediately get accused of spreading Russian propaganda. Why? Because the Russian government says it as well. So it's like the opposite game. Like, yes, whatever the Russian government says, you're not allowed to say. You have to affirm the opposite, even if what the Russian government is saying is true. Doesn't mean you think the invasion is justified. Doesn't mean you don't think the bombardment is immoral or unjustified. You're just simply acknowledging this fact that exists. And as long as the Russian government is also asserting this fact, you're automatically a Russian agent by virtue of the fact that you're recognizing it.
You see what's happening here? You see how slimy it is? They're casting themselves as martyrs to persecution. When by their telling, the fact that they're just trying to talk seriously about these facts, which aren't there, as I hope we've just established.
Right.
You know, it's so unfair that people are criticizing them. You know, they couch it in terms of, oh, we're being accused of being Russian agents, et cetera, et cetera. You know, maybe the odd chud from a liberal media outlet makes a stupid remark on Twitter about, oh, you're being paid by Putin or something. You know, that's not what we're actually talking about. We're talking about people criticizing them for talking rubbish in the context of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, you know, sowing the exact kind of confusion about what's actually happening there that aids Putin, that aids this vicious imperialist war. That's what they're being criticized for. And they're casting themselves as much, you know, and of course, their own assumption, they're saying, they're giving all these pieties about how you have to believe it. You have to believe this bad thing about Russia because the government says so. What are they doing but exactly the same kind of reflexive thinking in reverse?
I just think it's amazing that when she admitted that they had the biolabs and then immediately afterwards said, but we're worried about Russia getting a hold of them. And so if there isn't some nefarious stuff happening in those labs, Why would you care if Russia got a hold? No, they're just working on things that'll help.
Jimmy is
people
there
and
basically
their-
parroting Glenn's line back to him. That is something that Glenn has already said in the context of this interview. It's something he says in his Substack. It's his basic maneuver. Well, if she says they're worried about the Russians getting hold of these labs, how can they also say these labs are innocuous? Which, you know, I think you might know this, Daniel, but it is possible for materials that are dangerous to nevertheless be used for things that aren't necessarily biological weapons.
Yeah, actually, there are plenty of things in a biological research facility or in a pharmaceutical research facility that could be purposed for other uses as it happens. Yeah, I mean, I could probably list you a billion examples if you gave me a little bit of time.
Here's one example: anthrax. Right.
Sure.
One of the things that Glenn again likes to talk about is, well, I mean, people say, the United States would never secretly, develop biological weapons, and yet in 2003 or whatever it was, there was the anthrax terrorist attack, and that came from a U.S. lab. The anthrax can be used to make vaccines.
Don't give them that little piece of information. We'll never hear the fucking end of it. And I mean, if you're trying to, cure diseases, you have samples of those diseases. If you're, basically any, pharmaceutical intervention, particularly like a cancer, intervention, chemotherapy, for instance, can be repurposed and used as a chemical or biological weapon. I mean, the solvents that we'd use. I mean, ethanol is flammable, methanol is flammable, isopropyl alcohol. I mean, these could be used to make Molotov cocktails or whatever. I mean, it's endless. And also, I mean, just to be clear here, there are reasons to not want Russia to get control of these facilities. It has nothing to do with weaponizing their contents. Like, also, you wouldn't want, Russian military forces to have access to them because it prevents, medical testing of like COVID tests and other types of, because who knows what all of these facilities are and whether they're actually doing kind of basic research or whether they're doing, I mean, any of these things can be called a biolab. I haven't looked deeply into exactly what these facilities are and and how they differentiate between, kind of more routine medical testing or whatever. But you want these to remain in service to the people of Ukraine because we value the health of the people in Ukraine. It's just, I mean, it's, again, I keep saying this, but it's just the dumbest possible shit.
It is, and yet it goes on and it goes on and it goes on and it goes out to a big audience.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, absolutely.
This is child logic. This Glenn Greenwald, supposedly this serious journalist, is saying, well, if they're so harmless, why are you worried about the Russians getting? That's literally an argument he makes. And right. Jimmy Dore is helping him to, Jimmy Dore is helping him to disseminate that. And at the same time, Glenn Greenwald is bringing his patina of journalistic respectability, and he's worked with a whistleblower, etc., and lending it to Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're just working on things that'll help people and cure their health. We don't want Russia to also be able to help people and cure their health. That would be horrible. Is that what they're saying, Glenn?
Like that's what they're doing. And like the US wanting Ukraine to have its own biological research facilities is somehow stopping Russia from helping its own people.
As if there are not medical research facilities in Russia. I mean, that's really the reason they needed access to facilities to make ibuprofen. That's why Russia really invaded Ukraine. We just couldn't get ibuprofen. We all had headaches.
Well, I do now. Yeah.
The migraine sufferers of Russia will suffer no longer for lack of acetaminophen. I mean, it's just.
But the real reason, the meta reason we don't want Russian troops to take possession of Ukrainian biological research facilities is that Russian troops shouldn't be in Ukraine.
Right.
They've invaded in an act of naked, unprovoked imperialist aggression that all of this is studiedly pulling attention away from and trying implicitly, despite Glenn's pieties about, we're not saying the invasion's good, despite all that, it is implicitly implying a justification all the way through. And it's disgusting. Anyway,
Absolutely.
let's get through the rest of this clip.
Well, I mean, they've kind of had these shifting defenses because they obviously didn't anticipate she was going to go and blab her mouth about these things and didn't have an
Yes.
answer, on the ready. So the first thing they said was, no, she was just referring to this very noble and heroic program instituted by the United States Senate under, those bipartisan centrist heroes, Sam Nunn of Georgia and Richard Lugar of Indiana, who's kind of a old wise men of Washington who had a program to secure and dismantle old Soviet biological, chemical, and nuclear programs in the old Soviet republics. And they did do some of that. They went to Kazakhstan and other places, and they found anthrax labs, and the U.S. already has its own anthrax.
Again, baking, just hallucinating, projecting onto this conversation. I think that'll do, because he just goes on and on and on. But that is what we're talking about. You can say it in that skeptical, sneering tone. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about an open, public domain U.S. funding arrangement with Ukrainian labs that remain under Ukrainian domestic control for keeping these old Soviet research facilities, keeping them safe and stable so that everybody benefits. And no doubt the Americans have their own, selfish imperialistic reasons for doing that. Reality is complicated, but that is what we're talking about. And you can say it in this, well, you can believe that, you can believe anything way. That's not journalism. That's not skepticism. That's not fact checking. It's certainly not progressive or radical politics.
No, not at all. And it's not anti-imperialism just to take Russia's side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the thing. This is what infuriates me about these people, because they are exactly what they criticize in reverse. They complain endlessly about MSNBC and CNN and, all these people use it. Oh, well, you just believe anything the American government tells you. You're literally doing the same thing in reverse with the Russian government. And just like Chris Hedges or whoever says, oh, I don't believe everything Biden tells me, you say you don't believe everything Putin tells. But you're doing the same thing. You've just relocated, as George Orwell said in Notes on Nationalism way back in the 30s, when he was talking about Western Stalinists, very similar people, Caleb Maupin, etc. They've just relocated their blind loyalty to country and king and God and everything from the embarrassing domestic context where it doesn't look good if you're a journalist or an intellectual or whatever, to the foreign context. So you keep the exact same habits of thought, the exact same sort of conformist, cringing habits of obedient thought, and you move them from Churchill and the king to Stalin. They're doing that. They are what they behold in reverse.
Yep. No, absolutely.
And another thing I just want to talk about when we're talking about Ukraine and Victoria Nuland and these people, this isn't the first time they've hallucinated stuff onto Victoria Nuland, right? And one of the things with all these people, Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, and by extension, the hangers-on, the pilot fish on YouTube, Jimmy Dore, Tim Pool, all these people, Russell Brand, all these people, they will all talk about, I don't know about Tim Pool, he might not say this, but certainly Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore say this. They will all talk about the 2014 Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine as a coup. It's just a fact for these people. They will just say, it's a coup, 2014 coup, Euromaidan coup in Ukraine. They'll just say that's a fact. They have no evidence for that whatsoever. None that I can see. It was a genuine, it's complicated. It got hijacked by elements of the far right, etc., etc. It was a genuine people's revolt in response to the people of Ukraine of all sorts of political persuasions. They weren't, it wasn't an angelic, politically perfect protest or anything like that, but en masse, the people of Ukraine in huge numbers revolted, occupied Kyiv, stuck it out, kept going until, out of exasperation with the president at the time, who was a vote rigging, authoritarian, police violence using authoritarian, as I say, who was defying both his own pledges and the majority desire for trade relations in a Western direction with the EU in favor of pro-Russian policies that the majority of people in Ukraine did not want. And they revolt, they occupy, they protest, etc., etc. The guy flees. He gets the parliament, the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, they say, including all the deputies of his own party, say, well, he's gone. We can't, he's got to go. They depose him. This is a coup, apparently, for these people.
Right.
And their evidence basically boils down to a leaked phone call between Victoria Nuland, who was at that point the Assistant Secretary of State, a phone call between her and the then US ambassador to Ukraine, in which they have a conversation about the situation and talk about who they would like to see as the next president. That's it. And the smoking gun is that the guy they would like to see as the next president was in fact the next president, which is no surprise to anybody because he was the leader of the opposition. and the second biggest party in the Rada at the time,
Right. And even if, even if we say, okay, look, the State Department put their thumbs on the scale and someone, that doesn't.
I don't doubt they brought influence to bear because
because it's the fucking U.S. State Department, duh.
Yeah.
But it doesn't invalidate the political realities on the ground in Ukraine. There's so much about this whole thing that I just find disgusting, because it is just, anytime you view any so much of the conversation around this on a whole lot of political spectra is nothing ever happens without the influence of the U.S. State Department. That these places do not have their own internal politics, that they do not have their own autonomy, that it's ultimately the CIA is just puppet masters playing with strings here at all times. And it's just, again, it's simplistic, it's infuriating. Look, this stuff is complicated. I don't understand this stuff. I've been trying to look into the history of Ukraine and the Euromaidan and all those sort of, and I'm this history is lost to me. I have a very difficult time following it personally, just because it's not my field. It's not something I've been following for years, and the people that I trust who know the history, who go into it in detail, it's a complicated history, and to take all of that and then turn it into State Department propaganda and or NATO pressure, or the CIA did it or whatever, is it's just so myopic, and it's frankly racist. I mean, it's just,
well, I recently watched a Loner Box video. We recognized Loner Box's videos about Lawrence Southern, and I recently watched his video about Russell Brand. Very, very good video. Again, like Sophie from Mars's video, I strongly recommend it. And he called it, and I thought this was excellent, he called it American exceptionalism in reverse.
Yep.
I think that's brilliant, because that's what it is.
That is a very good video for sure.
Yeah. And it comes of these people, they pose as left-wingers, they pose as progressives or socialists or whatever. I don't think Glenn Greenwald does, but he on some level, he poses as,
he poses as on the left, whatever,
Sort of, yeah. But Jimmy Dore certainly poses as being on the left, and all these people do to some extent or another, but they have no belief whatsoever in the power of ordinary people to influence events. They don't have no, and the Euromaidan protests are complex, and they're far from, ideologically satisfactory from an orthodox Marxist or anarchist or whatever point of view. Don't get me wrong. There's I'll recommend people to a very good episode of the Antifada, which goes into this stuff. It's complicated and it's messy, etc. But it was fundamentally about people en masse protesting very bravely against a murderous police crackdown, authoritarian, vote rigging, corrupt president who was more or less openly in hoc to a foreign power that's, literally centuries of aggression against Ukraine. And they protested and they occupied and they revolted, and it was a revolution. Whether you like how it ended, none of that, it was ordinary people revolting and changing things. And these people who pose as being on the left, they have no faith in that, and they don't like it. So it's all got to be the CIA. It's all got to be the US State Department. It's all got to, they fundamentally don't believe ordinary people can do anything like this. It's all got to be powerful people pulling strings. Right. Well, that's what they think politics is.
And there's this kind of fundamental, and this maybe not quite what you were going for, but there's this fundamental thing that the unit of analysis that they use is the unit of the nation state, that the nation state itself has. Ukraine wants things, and Russia wants things, and the United States wants things. And I understand why you play that game if you're talking about if you're playing Risk, if you're doing foreign relations LARPing, I understand why people speak in those modes. But usually people who have, actual expertise in international relations and who know these things also understand that there are internal divisions that matter, and that there are other modes of analysis. And certainly no one who considers himself a leftist of any sense should be viewing the world through this kind of lens, because nation states are fundamentally socially constructed pieces of bullshit, and we're supposed to be supporting the working class and working people and ordinary human beings, as opposed to any of their governments, and we can judge these governments on a sliding scale of bad to very bad. But ultimately, it's just I do feel like these people are just sitting around, they're just they see themselves Napoleon, moving pieces around on a map or something, they're playing the great game. And, it's just, I mean, it's just wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong, but it's so compelling because, I'm sure a lot of the audience finds it compelling because they have not been exposed to a sort of more genuine left politic that views things through these lenses of the working class. I mean, you've watched a ton of Jimmy Dore. Has he said word one about the actual Russian protesters against Putin's war? Has he said anything in support of these people who literally, sign themselves up for death penalty for protesting this, and who are doing it in astonishing numbers, given that?
I don't want to say that he hasn't, because I don't know, because I haven't watched all his videos, even all his videos about Ukraine and Russia. But if he has, I haven't seen it. And he does not, he does not generally talk very much about stuff like that. Like, there's one video on the Amazon warehouse union. There's one.
Right.
There's several.
And I'm sure
slapping Chris Rock, but there's one on the Amazon union.
Was the one about the Amazon union being used to just slam AOC? Was that what his take was?
Well, I didn't watch it, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I guarantee you that's the only reason, because AOC didn't show up and support them in an overt enough way. And so oh my God. I literally can just write these things for them. They should hire me. Just hire me. We can hire us. We could use it. I'll take the paycheck. No, I won't. I will not take that paycheck. Believe me. I have to look myself in the mirror. It's fine.
But just on the subject of Russian dissenters, there were a load of Russian scientists who literally took their lives in their hands, incredible heroism, to publicly call out the Biolabs conspiracy theory thing, to say, no, this is crap. Our government is lying to you. In Russia, they're doing this.
Yeah.
People high profile under their own names.
You get a bullet in the back of your head for that.
Nothing on the Jimmy Dore that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no, I mean Jimmy Dore, he's gonna get canceled on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, free speech market.
Just fuck off. I mean, just fuck off.
But it is this kind of, it's there's no class analysis, there's no structural analysis, there's no real awareness of the complexity of history. It's immaterial. It's idealism in the philosophical sense. It is not a materialist left analysis, and yet it is being presented as one. It is this very crude sort of canny nose tapping, you can't fool me, I'm too cynical, crude folk geopolitical realism that is being peddled to people as a left analysis, as a progressive analysis. And Jimmy Dore is like the populist wedge of this, and I find that very, very insidious, particularly in the context of implicitly supporting this atrocious imperialist aggression from Vladimir Putin. I just think that, and it's, it doesn't help the cause of actual opposition to US imperialism either. It vulgarizes it. It degrades it.
Right.
It's bad on so many levels.
Right. No, exactly. I think we have an episode here. We can go for an hour and a half.
I think we do. Yeah.
I think we can I think we can record later this week and kind of do this as a two-parter. I think that's probably the best bet.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was going to suggest the same thing. I just want to close with one thing, which is that
Sure.
We opened with the cold open was Jimmy during one of his many appearances on Fox with Tucker Carlson, and I don't really feel the need to comment on that cold open because I think it very much speaks for itself. But the interesting thing is, particularly given Jimmy's insistence that you can just discount stuff based on who's saying it. This source says something I don't like. Well, this source once met, Joe Scarborough at a party. Therefore, I don't have to, that sort of crude child reasoning. The Biolabs conspiracy theory was very effectively, very quickly, very sensibly, very accurately debunked by Jennifer Griffin, the national security correspondent at the Pentagon, on Fox News to Sean Hannity.
Oh my God.
I won't put the clip here because you don't, if you want to find it, it's on YouTube.
Right.
Fox News debunked this crap on the Sean Hannity bit, kind of while Sean Hannity was almost arguing with her. And because she is at least tethered on some level to reality. She just debunks it in about 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and this is This just shows how deep the establishment is going to hide the truth. That's all this is. What, you trust somebody on Fox News? Let me go hang out with Tucker Carlson. He's got the real thing. He's on Fox Nation now. It's fine. The stuff that's too racist to be on Fox News.
But there you go. I mean, Jimmy's grift is to present himself as the, no flies on me. You can't fool me. I'm the guy that tells you the truth. I get slandered and smeared and persecuted for telling you the truth. And come to me and you'll get the real story, etc. And this is his level of honesty. This is his level of internal consistency. Just on how he himself peddles this crap incredibly lazily, assuming that you won't. If you're the audience, this guy's insulting you with every word he speaks because he assumes you won't bother to check. He assumes that you'll just believe everything he says. He assumes that you will just swallow it when he openly contradicts himself, both literally and in terms of his own methods and his own reasoning and his own argumentation inside his own videos. So I think that's a point worth making. And I think we've got a video here. This is going to be a two-parter. I don't really know if Jimmy Dore warrants a two-parter, but fuck it, I've done the research.
Well, plus we've already done one episode on him. But you're right, he does have a massive audience, and I think people are going to enjoy this. I think people really liked the first one, and I think people are going to like this even more. So yeah. So, and just a little taster of the next one. And the next one we're going to be getting onto Jimmy's sort of long-term reaction to being basically destroyed by Sean in the famous video where Sean takes him apart over the vaccine ivermectin thing, because his initial response is quite interesting, and then his longer-term response is quite interesting, and that's going to be taking in stuff about Max Blumenthal and the Grey Zone, and about how Abigail Thorne of Philosophy Tube is apparently funded by and run by Prince Charles and the royal family, and about how that somehow proves that Sean and the rest of BreadTube is a CIA op. So I'm excited to talk about this because I have some notes on this for sure. And that's going to take us into an interview that Jimmy did with Caleb Maupin, who is an interesting chap, as we've already referred to. Very enlightening intellectual conversation between those two about this one. And we're going to be doing that and some other things. So I'm looking forward to that because I hate Jimmy Dore for the most rational reasons. So yes, thank you for listening.
Also, obviously, I'm being paid by the CIA. Clearly,
Well, I mean, you too. I'm being paid by MI5. I think that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. What the fuck's going on there?
Yeah, what's happening? Yeah, no. No. Yeah. Thanks, Jack, for prepping that for us. Thanks to everybody for listening. You can check us out. We each have a Patreon. You can check us out on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And until then, we will talk about Jimmy Dore some more in the next episode. So see you then.
Bye. That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.